All right, we'll get started. We've only got about an hour. We want to get as much in as we possibly can. We'll have senators going in and out because we have votes going on. Don't think that there's no interest there. It's just this is a very busy day. We haven't been up there much lately, but we're back. Welcome to everybody on the World Wide Web out there and everybody that's here. It's an important week. This is Police Week. Time to recognize and honor the men and women in uniform who serve and protect our states and local communities. I'm honored to host this roundtable to discuss the unprecedented challenges facing our state and local law enforcement officers. The U.S. is experiencing a massive crime wave throughout our cities, driven by President Biden's intentional border disaster. It's no wonder we have had a historic number of retirements among law enforcement officers and more difficulty than ever recruiting to the force. To compensate our police and sheriffs, state agencies, and prosecutors are working overtime to enforce our laws and protect our communities. The opioid crisis continues to devastate U.S. communities, fueled by fentanyl smuggled into the country, which is killing our kids and making cartels filthy rich. What people don't realize is that it isn't just our federal officers along the border who are managing the fallout of the president's failed and fallen policies. Our state and locals in every community across the country are dealing with drug and human trafficking, violent crime, and murders every single day. You all are the last line of defense against the lawlessness that threatens to tear our communities and our country apart. More time, it must be done. I want to thank Hoover City Police Chief Nick Durgis, Coleman County Sheriff Matt Gentry, and Chief Counsel of Alabama Attorney General Catherine Robinson for traveling to Washington, D.C. to participate in this event. I also want to thank Dean Keeter, former Executive Director of President Trump's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice, as well as Chad Wolf, former Acting Secretary of Homeland Security, and Pam Bondi, former Attorney General for the state of Florida, for joining this conversation. Finally, I want to thank my colleagues, Senator Marshall Blackburn, Rick Scott, Katie Britt, and Eric Smith, who is also the former Attorney General from Missouri, for honoring these law enforcement officers. So, Senator Scott, I'll let you give your opening remarks, and we'll move from there.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank Senator Tuberville for putting this together. I think the most important thing we can do is always support our law enforcement. If you think about our states, nobody wants to build a business in an area that they deem as dangerous. Nobody wants to send their kids to school if they don't believe they're going to come home. And nobody wants to buy a house in a bad neighborhood. And it's all tied to great law enforcement. I want to recognize Attorney General Bondi. We both got elected together, never having run for office before back in 2010, and we had 8 years working together as governor and Attorney General. She was a star. She has an unbelievable relationship with our state law enforcement, our 66 sheriffs, and our police chiefs all across the state. She was active in a variety of areas, including human trafficking, and just did a great job. I want to thank Chad Wolf for being here. We all had the opportunity to work with Chad when he was running Homeland Security, and got distinguished. And we would be in better shape if Chad was there today. I just did a panel last week in Florida, talking with police chiefs and sheriffs, talking about the number of people dying of fentanyl overdose. 76,000, I think it was, this last 12 months. And they're dealing with it all across our state, and I think every state in this country. So it's great to thank our law enforcement. They're the key to all of our prosperity, and I want to thank again Senator Tuberville for putting this together.
Thank you. Senator Black.
Well, thank you, Senator Tuberville, for doing this and bringing us all together. And thank you to all the law enforcement officers that are here and also that are watching. We are grateful for your service. I had the opportunity on Monday of this week to be with our Sheriff's Department in Watt County, Tennessee. And there we dedicated a bridge to a fallen law enforcement officer. And it was so insightful to have conversations with these officers that are a part of the Sheriff's Department. And then also we had people from Tennessee Highway Patrol, police departments that were there. And one of the things that they brought up to me was their concern over how to recruit and retain law enforcement officers and the impact that is having. And resignations are up across the country as much as 47% since 2019. And as we talk about safety and security, and as we pause and commemorate Police Week and say thank you for that, we need to realize the importance of making certain that the focus is on funding, not defunding our law enforcement community, and making certain that their work environment is as safe as it can possibly be. So thank you, Senator Tuberville.
Thank you, Senator Blackburn. Senator Britt?
Thank you so much, Senator Tuberville, for hosting this discussion, especially during National Women's Week. It's great to have so many law enforcement officers around the country here in Washington this week. And particularly, I want to say thank you to those familiar faces that I see here at the end of the dais. Appreciate the great work that you all do and our wonderful state of Alabama. And it is an honor to stand shoulder to shoulder with each of you. I know that we're going to speak of a number of important issues today, whether it's fentanyl crisis or the rise in violent crime or the disaster at our southern border. And I want to highlight that there is no one who knows these issues better than the hardworking men and women in law enforcement. They see these things, challenges, face to face every single day. I also want to say thank you for leaving the safety of your home every day so that we can return to ours. I want you to know that I believe, and we've got to work diligently to make sure that we not only support you, but that we move efforts forward in this Congress and beyond that allow you to do your job even better, making sure you're the best trained, equipped, and ready across the country. I also want to just say, as ranking member of the Homeland Security Subcommittee there on appropriations, continuing to make sure that we keep our community safe by securing our southern border is a top priority of mine. I am proud to work with so many of my colleagues here in the Senate and certainly all of the distinguished members here on this panel to courageously stand with our courageous law enforcement officers and always back the blue. So I look forward to continuing to partner together and appreciate the opportunity to hear from all of you today.
Thank you. And last but not least, former Attorney General from the great state of Missouri, United States Senator Eric Schmidt.
Thank you, Coach, and thanks for putting this together. It's an honor to be on the dais with so many friends who share I think the same mission, which is to support our men and women in uniform who do really dangerous work. As with Pam, served as Attorney General in Missouri and got to see firsthand just the dedication every day, the sacrifice, going when there was an officer shot, and in many instances when that happened, passed away, I tried to make it a point of either getting to the hospital, being with the families, making the phone call, and to a person, the family members understood the dangers. Certainly the individuals understood the dangers, but wanted to serve their communities. And I think that especially in this place that we live in right now with some people where there's a just tremendous amount of disrespect, I think it's important for us to always be verbalizing the respect that we have for the men and women in law enforcement, how important it is, literally kind of holding society together in really dangerous times. And so I just want to acknowledge that. From that previous role of serving as the chief law enforcement officer in my state and coming to the Senate now, certainly working with my colleagues to sponsor legislation that I think matters, and doing everything we can to support you and finding ways, I think, to break down the barriers that sometimes separate different agencies and the work that they do for their common mission. So I just want to, on this really important week here at the Capitol, thank each and every one of you and to the men and women, again, who wear that uniform, who are running into danger when everybody else is running the opposite direction. We just thank you very much. Thank you, Coach.
Thank you. And now former Attorney General from the great state of Florida, Pam Bondi.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you so much for putting together this great panel. Every Police Week, I always talk about my friend. When I was a prosecutor, his name was Ricky Childers, and he was a homicide detective killed in the line of duty. Middle of the week, early morning, he and his partner, Randy Bell, were headed out on a call and gunned down by a violent felon many years ago. And since then, I think we've all lost many friends, given what we do for a living. And there's no ordinary day in the life of a police officer. And imagine being the spouses of those homicide detectives who were killed and all the officers since. And Senator Scott, thank you for your friendship and your unwavering support for law enforcement. Rick, we've been to way too many funerals together, haven't we, throughout the state of Florida? Way too many. And that's why it's so important that we honor these great men and women today. Thank you all. I have the honor right now of introducing Catherine Robertson, who is the chief counsel to my dear friend, Attorney General Steve Marshall of Alabama. There's a lot of Alabama folks here today. I don't know. But she is the chief counsel to Steve Marshall, and she previously worked for Jeff Sessions as his legislative counsel when he was a U.S. Senator, and on the Senate Judiciary Committee, and also at Department of Justice. So, Catherine, thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to take a minute just to brag on our state when it comes to policing and public safety. Like many states, Alabama went through a phase of being pretty soft on crime. It started about 10 years ago. Crime was down, and we really got complacent. The only conversations we were having about crime were about the plight of the offender. Everything was about reform, which is the code word for leniency. And in about 2019, we were confronted with the harsh reality of that kind of thinking. Our overly lenient parole board let out a man with a violent track record who committed a triple homicide, including a child. We had 7 police officers murdered in a 13-month period, and as hard as it may be to believe, we were making national headlines for atrocious violent crime. We had a 3-year-old kidnapped and murdered in Birmingham. A young college girl was abducted and murdered, and it was honestly really scary. And to the credit of my boss and to our lawmakers, the good news is that Alabama really responded. We recognized that as a state government, we had lost sight of the fact that the first civil right of every Alabamian, really every American, is to be free from the fear of violence. And so we got to work. So I'd like to just run through a couple of our accomplishments. Our state in the last 5 years has enacted new laws to usher in more truth in sentencing so that our prisons are not a revolving door. We have sped up capital appeals so that victims of the worst crimes no longer wait 30 years for justice. We have restructured our parole board. We have made it a capital offense to take the life of a law enforcement officer. We have imposed harsher penalties for gang violence. We have given judges more leeway to hold violent offenders without bail. And just last month, we've expanded our ability to prosecute child pornography. So I would say that we reacted pretty decisively. We did it quickly, and we did it usually with bipartisan support. I'd also like to just note one other unique facet of Alabama law, which is that our state attorney general has statewide original jurisdiction to prosecute any crime in our state and to take over any prosecution in our state. And that is a tool that any conservative state needs, because there is really no use in Mr. Soros funding DA races when the state attorney general has the power to do whatever needs to be done. And I think that's why we've had a lot of success in Alabama with keeping our DA's races clean. Our goal has been to raise the standard of what our state is willing to tolerate when it comes to crime, and I think our people have decided that we don't want to tolerate much. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to shed a little light on that. Some incredible partners at this table that we work well with, and I think this is a really important conversation. Thank you, Coach.
Now I have the honor of introducing Chief of Police Nick Durgis of Hoover, Alabama. The chief, you've been chief since 2005, and prior to that, you were assistant chief of police. And he has also done many initiatives within the department, such as special response team, school resource officer program, which is huge, development and construction of a new police operations center and a jail facility. Thank you, Chief, for your unwavering service.
Thank you for allowing me to address you this afternoon. I'm honored to be here during Police Week to recognize and pay tribute to those officers who have paid the ultimate sacrifice to keep our community safe. Police work is inherently dangerous. We respond to serious and stressful incidents, and we see serious injury and death. In the past, the police officer's wellness was determined by their physical fitness, but now our profession recognizes the important role that mental wellness plays in someone's overall health. Departments are now implementing wellness to help identify risk factors so they can be addressed. 2 years ago, we hired a behavioral health coordinator for our department. He works with our employees and provides on-site counseling services during critical incidents. He also works with our citizens who have issues related to mental health. At the request of a law enforcement officer, he can respond by phone or in person to the scene if there is reasonable cause to believe the person is mentally ill and is likely to be a danger to self or others. This position has already proved crucial to our department. Having a staff person who can facilitate communication between family, hospitals, probate court, and can use his knowledge to determine the next course of action. We also have a Veterans Liaison volunteer group that currently has 10 police officers who are former service members. These officers can respond to a call from the shift or be called out when we determine a veteran is in crisis. We roughly have 4,500 veterans residing in our city. Our liaison officers are required to attend training dealing with de-escalation, crisis intervention, mental illness and awareness, and policy law. We also work very closely with our local VA. Mental wellness is a concern for us, not only to our employees, but our veterans and our community members. We know our employees are our biggest asset. Today, we cannot ignore wellness. We must continue to provide services that assist employees with their well-being, and all of our communities benefit when our officers perform at their highest level. Thank you.
And Chief, I understand you have a question for Senator Scott.
I do. Senator Scott, our nation's been facing an opioid crisis for over 10 years. In a time period of just 3 years, 2021 through 23, over 300,000 people died of a drug overdose. Many of those unfortunate deaths were due to fentanyl. What new strategies can the federal government enact to bolster local and state law enforcement efforts? Our intelligence community tells us the majority of fentanyl coming into our country comes from Mexico. Recognizing that we do not have a secure border, what policies can we expect in the near future to eliminate the flow of fentanyl from Mexico into the United States?
Well, I'd like to say that we have a president and a majority in the Senate that everything will get done. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I just did my third fentanyl roundtable, and our sheriffs and police chiefs are dealing with this every day. Their labs are dealing with it every day. As soon as Biden got elected, we saw new strains come in. I was down in the lab I think it was in Sarasota County, and the sheriff was telling me what was happening. So the first thing we ought to do is secure a border. It's the most simple thing we ought to be doing. It's what Chad tried to do when he was at Homeland Security, and unfortunately we have a completely open border. The next thing we can do is stop buying anything from China. I mean, they're the ones killing. They're sending the precursors to kill over 70,000 Americans of fentanyl every year. So I don't know why anybody in this country buys anything from China. We need to pass logical legislation that would be helpful. With the support of everybody, all the senators here, we passed legislation that said that our Border Patrol is going to update their interdiction guidelines, which is going to help them. I've got a bill that everybody up here supported that we're going to expand the waters that our Coast Guard can go interdict people from 12 to 24 weeks. Unfortunately, the positive is passed the House. Unfortunately, Schumer's holding it up in the Senate. I think all of us have worked on different legislation that would force the Biden administration to secure the border, whether it's trying to tie Ukraine aid to having real security. I have a variety of bills that would basically force the Biden administration to do it. Unfortunately, the position we're in right now is we have a White House and we have a majority in the Senate that is okay with an open border. So unfortunately, you guys are going to deal with it on the front lines. You're going to deal with, one, the devastation to families in every city and county in this country. That's number one. Number two, the risk of law enforcement when they're around it.
I'd like to add to that, if I could, just a second. I know visiting our police chiefs in Alabama, several of them have told me that they had never heard of the word fentanyl until 2020. It was heroin, meth, cocaine, marijuana. but there was no fentanyl. Now, this is by far, the biggest drug in our state of Alabama, and we're losing lives every day. So I just like to add that. Anybody else want to comment on that?
No, and Senator Scott, thank you for fighting the opioid crisis for all the drug abuse throughout our state when you were governor. And now all of you great senators have continued on. If I could add one thing, I always do a public service message on fentanyl for parents. Never, ever let your child, anyone you know, take anything from someone they don't know, even if it's a Tylenol. Because Senator Scott and I have seen too many people who thought they were taking, what's the drug of choice among kids? Adderall, Xanax. They buy it on the street, it's laced with fentanyl, and they drop dead instantly.
There was, in 2021, there was a young man, came home from the Air Force for Mother's Day to surprise his mom, and his friend gave him a Xanax that he bought online and was dead within 5 minutes. And so I know when the Attorney General Bondi was the Attorney General, she was constantly trying to, she had to constantly change the regulations to try to deal with the new precursors that China was creating constantly. And it's after our kids and our grandkids. So my poor grandkids, every time I see them, I tell them about drugs. So, it scares the crap out of you because one mistake, you're dead. You're dead. I don't want to lose, I've got 6 grandsons and a granddaughter. I don't want to lose one of them.
Even taking a Tylenol from someone you don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that a lot of these precursors almost exclusively come from China to Mexico and then across that border. So when we talk about the southern border, when we talk about the open nature of that southern border, it's at the hands of the cartels that 100,000 Americans are dying of opioid overdose or poisoning. So the two are linked together. I'm not sure that gets out there enough. We talk a lot. I see a lot in the press about fentanyl overdoses and the importance of making sure you're educating folks, but it originates, again, from China through Mexico across that border at the hands of the cartels. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and this administration, with all the talks with China, even our president directly talks with President Xi, has never asked them about fentanyl. Never asked them. I guess they're not concerned, but they need to get out in the real world and understand what's going on.
And our law enforcement officers are also exposed to it because they are our first responders. And Sheriff Matt Gentry from Coleman County, Alabama, you've been sheriff since 2015. The sheriff started his career with the Coleman County Sheriff's Office in '99. He found his niche in drug enforcement, so he's well aware of this. And also was a Coleman County District Attorney's Office investigator assigned to the DEA task force in Birmingham. So, Sheriff, thank you.
Thank you. Senators, I just want to thank you on behalf of all the sheriffs in Alabama for allowing me to be here and speak and talk about the issues that we're facing. One of the biggest issues that we're facing in law enforcement in Alabama is recruitment. And I go back to a liberal administration in the 2008-2010 anti-law enforcement wave. Well, those kids that heard that are our young adults today. And so we are seeing a decrease in men and women wanting to get in law enforcement. And we're losing leadership and patriotism with our children. Over the years, I've been blessed to see many things. One of the things I'm blessed with in Coleman County is I have a strong prosecutor. Our district attorney, Champ Crocker, who's here, is a strong prosecutor. He's a strong supporter of law enforcement and putting bad guys in jail, which is our job. I had a unique opportunity in May of last year to go to the border. I went to the Port of Hidalgo with a group from Alabama. And I got the unique advantage of seeing a president and a liberal media that will lie to what we are facing. And you say, well, what are you talking about? What I'm talking about is open borders. And really, it's what the sheriffs and the police chiefs are facing down there. It's not women and kids. The biggest thing that we're seeing is millions of men, 18 to 25, that are crossing the borders every day. You're talking about millions. Well, most of them have very violent backgrounds. What they are seeing is Haitians, Somalians, and Chinese nationals that are coming across, committing violent crimes in the state of Texas and other states. And guess what? That is moving to our states. And you think, well, how does it affect local law enforcement? Well, this is the thing. we're going to deal with it first. We're going to deal with the drugs that are coming across the border. We're going to deal with the violence that they're inflicting upon people in their homes. And so it's really a unique time for law enforcement, especially local law enforcement, because with them having an open borders and we have a president that does not care about our country, it takes law enforcement standing together with our citizens to be the voice. And I want you to know, senators, from all the sheriffs in Alabama, that we will always stand with you, and we will not give them an inch when they come to do harm in our communities. So I just want you to know you have our support, and we'll be there standing shoulder to shoulder with you.
I want to make a point. I agree on this recruitment challenge. When I was in my previous job, I was asked a question one time that I had not given a lot of thought to before I was asked, which I guess is not that unusual sometimes, but was, what is it that keeps you up at night? And for me, it was all the men and women who will never, we don't know who they are, we'll never know who they are, who will never go into law enforcement, who might have, but because of the culture that had been created by this defund the police movement. And in the state where I'm from, in St. Louis, she's no longer there, but there was a Soros prosecutor, Kim Gardner, who was a total disaster. And not just her inability or unwillingness to prosecute the bad guys, it had a trickle-down effect on law enforcement. If you think about it, the police officers, a demoralization, right? If they were working a case to bring to a prosecutor and the prosecutor just didn't want to do it and turned him away, that has an impact. There was an incident where they showed up at 2 in the morning in a rough neighborhood, broke up a fight, went to a car that looked suspicious, saw a gun, tried to get the gun away. There was a shooting. The guy was shot. The bad guy was shot, and the next morning in the paper, her comment was, well, I don't know what they were doing, the police officers were doing there at 2 in the morning. I mean, this is like, so residents feel unsafe, police officers and our sheriffs are undermined when you don't have prosecutors who actually want to do their job, because, the world needs a lot of social workers, but there's only one prosecutor in that county or in that city, and if that person doesn't want to do their job, the impact is devastating. So again, I think it's why it's really important to support the men and women in blue who protect us, because not just for them, but I think that the people who might be looking to go into that career, and we need more of them, need to know they're supported too.
Thank you, Senator. And Sheriff, you have a question, I understand, for Senator Tuberville.
Yep, I do. Coach, one of the things that we're seeing is rising crime in urban areas, which get a lot of media attention. However, the crime wave hasn't stopped there. We're getting also hit in our rural communities throughout Alabama. One of the things is, what can the federal government do to support law enforcement through federal funding? And given the anti-police movements, what can we do to ensure that our federal funding opportunities aren't jeopardized by politics?
First of all, every member of the federal government, especially Congress, needs to make law enforcement a priority again. We've gotten away from that. Senator Britt and I have gotten at least $20 million worth of federal funding sent back to the state, helped 28 different agencies. But the main thing is, it's not just urban. As you said, it has to go out in the rural. We're 60% rural state of Alabama. And we have as much mental illness, we have as much drugs, we have as much theft, human trafficking in the rural areas as we have in the urban areas. And so that can't be overlooked. And it's even harder, as you know, Sheriff, you cover, how many miles does your county, pretty much square miles?
We're close to 900 square miles.
Yeah, and so how many deputies do you have?
I currently have a little over 100 sworn deputies.
Yeah, and it's hard. I rode around with one of them for a day one time back when I was campaigning. It's a hard job, very hard. The one thing I'd like to do too, and say this, is we've got to put respect back to our law enforcement from the people that they serve. I think we're losing respect from a lot of people, from parents, and that goes on down to their kids. We've got to put respect. It's kind of like being a football coach. If you lose respect of your players, you're done. Same thing if you're in law enforcement. If people lose respect of their law enforcement has a tough time catching back up. But the problem with that is we have to back the law enforcement. They have to be given the ability to be funded, to have the training, and do the things that they need to do in the urban and the rural areas to make this all work. But it's a community affair. One thing that I've noticed since I've been here 3.5 years, if we continue to lose our streets and our communities, we will lose our country as we know it. I mean, there's no doubt about that, and it's going south quick. We don't have enough law enforcement people, we don't have enough support for them, enough training, enough money involved in that, but it's got to come from the federal government and the state and local government. So thank you, Sheriff, thank you for that.
And Senator, you made a great point, Coach, when you said that the human trafficking, people don't understand when you say every state is a border state now. Every state is the drugs, the gangs, the human trafficking. I think Chad will tell you in a little while, everything flowing right through the border, thanks to open borders. I'm going to go off a little bit because Senator Blackburn had to vote and just joined us again. And Catherine, I think you have a question for Senator Blackburn.
Yeah, it's a great segue. We were just talking about the important partnerships between prosecutors and law enforcement and federal, state, and local prosecutors. One thing we've been really concerned about is this new policy by Attorney General Garland. Back at the end of, I think, 2022, he sent out a memo to the U.S. attorneys across the country, directing them away from the department's long-standing policy of charging and pursuing the most serious, readily approvable offense. And we weren't really sure what that meant, but now, 2 years later, we can definitely feel there's been a little bit of a pullback. And I'm just curious, I know you're a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. Have y'all examined that policy and sort of studied its consequences?
Oh, indeed, we're trying to examine that policy. And as you can imagine, Senate Judiciary under Dick Durbin's leadership does not want to examine that policy. But as you mentioned, 2 years of this, what you're beginning to see is what this has yielded in city after city after city. I simply refer to it as soft on crime. Whether they are going below the recommended minimums on these sentences, or whether it is this policy of no cash bail. I have gotten so concerned about that policy, and you need look no further than Memphis, Tennessee, with what this has caused. And Coach, I know you know Memphis well. Last year, Memphis crime stats were atrocious. When you look at their murder rate, it increased 50% from 22 to 23. And when you have a city that has 400 homicides for the year, when you look at the fact that with juvenile crime, they had 500 juvenile criminal charges in a year. And I applaud the leadership in Memphis, both in the city and Shelby County, for saying we have got to get our arms around this. But when you look at the fact that there was a DA that campaigned on soft on crime and then implemented these soft on crime policies, not using cash bail, and going for leniency, and allowing people to get out while they were awaiting trial. This is something, when you have violent crime that is taking place, this is something the citizens of Shelby County and Memphis talk so much about. And I did a telephone town hall last night, and Shelby County and Davidson County, which is Nashville, were on the call. And Pam, you were talking about every state being a border state and the border. I want you to know most of the callers that were asking questions of us, it dealt with the border, the impact of drugs, human trafficking, crime in communities. Shelby County, repeatedly, caller after caller would say, thank you for trying to do something about crime. We've got a couple of pieces of legislation. I've got the Keep Violent Criminals Off the Street, which deals with reinstituting cash bail. and those policies requiring that for these violent criminals. I have a bipartisan piece, the After School Act, that deals with that window of time from 3 o'clock in the afternoon until 6 o'clock in the afternoon when kids commit crimes. And we've got that, we're pushing forward. And Senator Haggerty and I this week have reintroduced our Restore Law and Order Act. And that is direct grants to local law enforcement to be able to hire and train more officers so that you have more that are working on this violent crime and drug crimes.
Senator, thank you. And that time, that bill is so important because that time between 3 and 6 is also the time these kids get recruited into gangs when they're not home. Thank you. And it is now my pleasure to introduce Dean Keeter. Dean is formerly with ATF and Department of Justice and was President Trump's Executive Director of the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and the Administration of Justice at the Department of Justice. While serving in this role, he oversaw the first comprehensive review of the criminal justice system in more than 50 years. Dean was previously Chief of Intergovernmental Affairs at ATF.
Thank you, A.G. Bondi. I appreciate it. Senator Tuberville, thank you for the kind invitation to join you this afternoon and for putting on this roundtable. Today, Peace Officer Memorial Day, is an especially important day in the law enforcement community, and your commemoration of the fallen honors their sacrifice. And our discussion today about crime in America is what will allow us to go forward in a safer and secure nation. As A.G. Bondi said, I was privileged to work at the Justice Department, and aside from the singular privilege of working for A.G. Barr while I was at the department, I was blessed to have the opportunity to lead President Trump's Commission on Law Enforcement. The monumental effort of examining the totality of the criminal justice system, the first effort in more than 50 years, revealed a fundamentally sound system, which is still the best in the world, with honorable men and women working every day on behalf of victims and in the name of justice. Over the course of 12 short months, we looked at law enforcement, courts, corrections, prosecution, defense, technology, training, recruiting and retention, officer health, wellness, and safety, and we examined community relations. In fact, police community relations dominated the Commission's deliberations because not only did we do our work in the midst of COVID-19, but we also worked through the summer of massive civil unrest across the country. The release of the Commission's report coincided with the transition of administrations, and its more than 150 recommendations was not seriously reviewed, let alone adopted. That's very unfortunate because if you ask any one of our commissioners, they'll tell you that there is something for everybody in the Commission's report. One area that the Commission focused on was the use of technology in law enforcement. As you know, technology can be of immense help. With the right application, it can quickly help identify and find the perpetrators, and just as quickly, it can exonerate the innocent. When law enforcement looks to solve crimes and help the victims of crime, technology is employed in several ways. For example, extracting all the evidence at a shooting scene requires the comprehensive use of ATF's NIBIN program to identify criminal shooters and the crime guns. It also requires the employment of rapid DNA to identify criminal suspects within 90 minutes, well before a laboratory sample will ever be returned. Law enforcement also needs advanced drug identification and detection equipment to know when deputies and officers are dealing with fentanyl and the associated analogs. And they need enhanced forensic capabilities as crime becomes increasingly concealed by end-to-end encryption. The attacks of 9/11 demonstrated the need for interoperable and reliable communications, and that's why FirstNet and next-generation 911 systems, along with advanced mapping and dispatching software, are critically important to law enforcement and public safety. Law enforcement can also use emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, advanced weapons detection systems, and counter-UAS technology to keep us safe where we live and work. All of this is possible because of advanced training that employs virtual reality and augmented reality, enabling officers and deputies to be perfectly trained from their time in the academy all the way through their career. Law enforcement has been both my passion and my career, and it's a privilege to support the men and women on the thin blue line who protect us and serve us as public safety professionals. Every law enforcement officer makes sacrifices for people they don't even know, and on Peace Officer Memorial Day, let us never forget those who have made the ultimate sacrifice. I want to thank you so much for hosting this roundtable and for inviting me to participate. It's an honor to sit alongside this distinguished panel of professionals and be here today.
And thank you for your many, many years of service to our country. And I understand you have a question for my friend Senator Schmidt.
I do. Senator, as I just talked about technology, law enforcement around the country relies upon their federal partners to help them leverage that technology and the resources that would otherwise be unavailable to them. And criminals have gotten off because of the lack of communication between federal and state partners. Could you shed a little light on how the federal government might be able to support state and locals and improve access to data, technology, and crime experts?
Yeah, thank you. And I would be remiss not to point out that Pam Bondi is like a legend. And in the AG world, when I was coming in, like, she's really set the standard. Whether it was working with victims.
You're making me sound old.
No. I meant, no, like, whether it was working with victims, the opioid crisis, human trafficking, I mean, it just took the lead on so many things, and so it's good to see you here today. To answer your question, I think a big piece of that is training, but these joint task forces that exist, I think that helps break down some of the barriers that often separate even some federal agencies along the way, but certainly with locals. And I guess I would point to a few things. One is, I think part of this it takes leadership. You have to have people who want to go do these things and have a collaborative environment within law enforcement. And I think it starts with having a victim-centric mindset. As was mentioned earlier, so much of the attention by the so-called reformers has to do with the people who are committing violent crimes. And I think it's very important for us to maintain a focus on the victims and their families and what they've gone through. We did, and also the heroes, we instituted something called the Back to Blue Award, that we would go around the state and honor police officers or sheriffs who are doing not just big things that you might read in the newspaper, but they're sponsoring a kid's lemonade stand in their community, and just highlight the important work that they're doing and humanizing the people who are doing this work. So I think that some of that's leadership, but also like on human trafficking, we had coordinated among, I think it was like 14 different AG's offices for the largest human trafficking bust at the time in the U.S. I mentioned those joint task forces. Clearing the backlog of sexual assault kits. We were able to do that in Missouri, kind of take the lead, and that was leveraging technology, not overwhelming the highway patrol in our state that had that lab, but going outside and thinking outside the box a little bit and contracting with a private entity to help clear that backlog. And there were a lot of federal partners along the way. But one of the things I think I'm most proud of that I think is a good guidepost, but also a sign of how the Biden administration has gone astray. When I was AG during the Trump administration, we partnered and created something called the Safer Streets Initiative. It was the first of its kind initiative where we lent assistant AGs from our office to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Trump-appointed U.S. So like in St. Louis or in Kansas City, when those local prosecutors weren't doing their jobs, we were able to get prosecutions and convictions of people, whether it was on carjackings or unlawful possession of a firearm, whatever those were. Again, that hadn't been done before. There was a lot of trust there. And then when Joe Biden came into office, guess what happened? Those U.S. attorneys didn't want to do that anymore, which is insane to me. It should be a totally nonpartisan issue, prosecuting violent crime, but somehow it became part of the Democrats' identity, which is being soft on crime. So appreciate the work that you've done. And I think that what this boils down to is leadership and wanting to confront these challenges head on.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you now for fighting for our entire country. Coach, when you were putting this great panel together, you knew that the common denominator here with not only protecting our law enforcement from all the perils, but it had to do with the border. And that's why our dear friend and our next guest, Chad Wolf, former acting Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, you had to be here today, really, for this. Chad was the acting Secretary of Homeland Security under President Trump, and during his time at DHS, he navigated numerous global and domestic challenges, including COVID-19, civil unrest, numerous border and immigration crises, and historic natural disasters. And Chad, you also oversaw the most secure U.S. border in our history. Thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Pam. And Senator Tuberville, thank you for the invitation to be here. It's great to be on a panel with not only great members of Congress and senators, but with law enforcement professionals. During my time at DHS, I had the opportunity to interact and lead a number of them, so it's always good to be with you today. Police Week is a time for all of us to remember that the officers that died or that were killed in the line of duty the year prior, and we're grateful for their sacrifice. You know, a lot of folks don't realize that the Department of Homeland Security is the largest federal law enforcement agency in the nation. We had a little over 85,000 law enforcement officers. And when I had the honor of serving as acting secretary, I also had the opportunity to meet with literally hundreds of them from all over the country. And despite their various missions, as well as not only the DHS law enforcement officers, but the local law enforcement officers that we partnered with, despite their various missions, we shared one thing in common, and that's a desire to simply do their job, enforce the laws that protect our communities, and to do so with honor, unimpeded by politics or unnecessary bureaucracy. And so we talk a lot about how border security, which we've talked about today, is national security. And the reality is that what we do, or what we fail to do, in securing our border directly impacts the safety of our communities. And so whether you're looking at national security threats that are crossing that border every day, the unprecedented amounts of fentanyl being smuggled, the hundreds of thousands of children that are being trafficked at the hands of cartels, public safety threats, all of it impacts our community. None of it stays at the border. Border communities alone are not impacted about what's going on there. And so never was this more evident than with the tragic murder of Lincoln Riley, allegedly at the hands of an illegal alien in Georgia. And her death was entirely preventable, but made possible by misguided policies that elevated social justice over common sense public safety. And those policies didn't just endanger public safety, but they make the job of our law enforcement community that much more difficult. We can and we must do more to support our law enforcement community. And at the very least, we must empower them and support them so that they can simply and as safely as possible do their jobs each and every day and go home to their family each and every day. And so put simply, as I know we all agree here, we must continue to back the blue.
That's right. And thank you, Chad, for your dedication to our country and your continued dedication as Executive Director of America First Policy Institute, where you continue to support the America First principles, and I'm blessed to be a chair there and work with you to this day. And I understand you have a question for Senator Britt.
I do. Senator Britt, you are the sponsor of the Lincoln Riley Act here in the Senate, which obviously, as you know, requires ICE to arrest illegal aliens who commit certain crimes, but most importantly, to detain them until they can be deported. Now, I certainly understand how important this is to the safety of our communities during my time as acting secretary. I think, unfortunately, a lot of members of the general public probably weren't paying attention a lot to this issue prior to Lincoln's unfortunate death. I think today they are, and so I think that's an opportunity for us. And so clearly there are some very real-world implications for local law enforcement not partnering and not working with federal law enforcement. So I'd love to, talk a little bit more about your views on this topic. Obviously, the importance of the legislation that you sponsored, but other actions that perhaps Congress is looking at to address this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question, and thank you for your service. Was certainly proud to introduce the Lincoln Riley Act alongside Senator Ted Budd from North Carolina, and I want to talk about the importance of that and why we need it. But before that, kind of getting to the overarching theme of today and the complete disastrous policies of the Biden administration. No one should believe President Biden that he is serious about securing the border, and there are a number of things that you can point to. First of all, when he put forth his budget proposal this year, he actually had a 2% decrease to the Department of Homeland Security. Now, we know that Department of Homeland Security, to your point earlier, is obviously the most important thing in keeping our homeland safe, whether it's our Border Patrol agents, whether it's TSA, whether it's Coast Guard, you name it. That represented about a $1.25 billion decrease in the department's budget and his proposal. Now, you would say, okay, well, we need to save money. Let's look at our national debt. We're $34.5 trillion in debt. Let's start cutting. Absolutely, I would agree. But that's not what he did. He put money where he places value. And so while he had a 2% decrease to the Department of Homeland Security, he increased EPA by 19%, almost 20% actually, this year. Absolutely, totally ridiculous. When you're looking too at fentanyl, we've talked about that, leading cause of death between the ages of 18 and 45 in this nation. He didn't have any new funding for non-intrusive equipment at the border. We know, as you said earlier, where this is coming from China, makes its way to Mexico across our border, infiltrating every community across our country and the great state of Alabama. No new money for that, and only marginal increases when it came to actually counter fentanyl staffing, labs, technology. Completely and totally unacceptable. This administration is not serious about solving the problem. And then earlier, as we talked about human trafficking, if you look back at 2018, human trafficking was a $500 million business. Now, under Joe Biden, it is a $13 billion industry. So the facts are not on their side, and that's why we've got to get this back under control. When it comes to the Lake and Riley Act, the Lake and Riley Act, very similar to Sarah's Law, actually requires ICE to detain these illegal migrants that come here and commit these various crimes, detain until they can be deported. That is step one. Step two, it gives our states the opportunity to actually hold open border federal officials accountable for not enforcing our nation's immigration laws. We all know that we're a nation of immigrants. We're also a nation of laws, and those laws need to be enforced for the safety and security of Americans all across the country. And then third thing that we need to do, obviously, as Congress and this whole thing, is cut off funding streams to sanctuary cities. If you say that you are not going to cooperate with our federal officials, you're not going to enforce the laws on the books, you're not going to work with ICE when you have these things happen. I mean, you look at what happened to Lake and Riley, and her alleged murderer that both in New York was let go of NYPD custody, not detained by ICE, and then in Georgia with a citation there for shoplifting, and again, let go. If the Biden administration was courageous enough to actually enforce the law, I believe Lake and Riley would still be alive. And so this piece of legislation pushes that forward. And so I think we got to continue to work on all those avenues and continue to work to push this piece of legislation. It has recently become bipartisan. It's interesting how that happened. Happy to have people from the other side of the aisle join us. If they want to see the light, we're happy to welcome to it. And I hope that more and more Democrats will get on board, put politics aside, and actually put the safety and security of Americans first. A couple of things that I also think that we need to do. You look at Senator Cornyn's Back the Blue Act. You look at Senator Braun's Thin Blue Line Act. These are things that not only show our courageous law enforcement officers that we stand shoulder to shoulder with you, it also sends a message to Americans that says we have your back. And so making sure that we push those, I think, is critically important. And then last but not least, something that I'd like to mention is I am really proud of this group of senators for standing up and saying enough is enough when it comes to the crime-ridden policies or soft-on-crime policies that we see here in the District of Columbia. This is our nation's capital. You should feel safe and welcome and comfortable coming here. But to earlier points that we've seen, the people who sit on the city council, the mayor herself want to prioritize left-wing agenda over the safety and security of visitors who come here, of Americans, children who want to see the nation's capital, to witness history. And so we have pushed back on that successfully. I think we need to continue to do that in Congress, make sure that our voice is heard, and make sure that this place, the nation's capital, is somewhere where everyone can come and feel safe and secure. We just got to get back to prioritizing the rights and safety of hard-working people who sent us here and not those criminals who want to do them harm. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator, for fighting for our country and also for the memory of Lake and Riley and for her family. One thing that also is so important, we can fight to keep these illegal aliens in jail where they belong, but we also have to have prosecutors who are going to keep them there. And even in these conservative states, Florida, we have woke prosecutors, that's all I can think to call them, right, Senator Schmidt, who are letting people out. I said they should be running for public defender, not state attorney. And that's a big problem still in this country, and we've got to fight to get good law, it's not conservative or liberal, it's people who are going to follow the law and who are going to back the blue and protect our citizens and protect our police officers. So with that, are there any other final thoughts from our panel?
I'd like to ask the question of the sheriff and anybody here that wants to answer this, and the police chief. I read something a couple of weeks ago where early 1900s, we had less than 100 million people in this country, but we had 500,000 people that were being worked with in facilities, 500,000 out of 90 million, mental illness. Today we have 330 million people. We only have 30,000 people that are being worked with that have mental illness. What the heck is going on? I mean, we've tripled almost our number of people, but we have less people that are being treated for mental illness, and we all know it is a bad, bad problem. I know you deal with it, Sheriff. Your comments on that? How many you see your crime problem in terms of mental illness?
Sure, it's extremely high. Just as an example, so we average about 75,000 calls for service a year in Coleman County. Our deputies are responding to 3 either suicidal or homicidal calls every day. And the problem is the funding's been cut, so we don't have the facilities to take them to get treatment. But our mental health is on the rise, and it's something that we face every day, day in and day out. Just 2 weeks ago, we were in a barricaded standoff with a guy that had some mental illness issues. And it worked out well the way it should. But at the end of the day, our deputies are responding to, just in Coleman County, 3 suicidal, homicidal calls a day. And you wonder why people don't want to get in law enforcement. You wonder why young men and women avoid that service.
Yes, sir. I would say the majority of the mental illness calls that we deal with all stem from drug abuse, strung out. We've had, again, when I spoke earlier and talked about having the staff member to be able to go to critical incidents and so forth, it's helped us because in the past, you've got police officers out here that are dealing with people with mental illness. All of a sudden, they don't know really what to do. They don't have the connections to be able to call a hospital and say, we need to get this person committed for 72 hours for evaluation purposes and so forth. So that's really, really helped us. But like the sheriff said, we deal with those things, again, every day. And again, most of it stems from drug abuse.
Yeah, Chad, you're dealing with the border. Our understanding is Venezuela's emptying their prisons and everything, sending cases up here, probably of a lot of mental illness coming into our country. Did you see that when you were working in Homeland Security?
Well, what I certainly saw were a number of public safety threats, and so that's obviously mental ill individuals, but it's other bad individuals as well. And so I think if you just look at the metrics and the numbers coming across that border, it used to be 2/3 were coming from either Mexico or Central America, primarily 3 countries in Central America. Under the Biden administration, that has now flipped. 2/3 of individuals crossing that border from all other parts of the world, including South America, such as Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, and others. And I think what that tells you is that other countries are either not policing their individuals and are allowing these individuals to make that dangerous journey, and or a lot of these countries, when we do apprehend them and pick them up here, they are not taking their individuals back. Their nationals they're not allowing their nationals to be repatriated, removed, or deported back to their home country. So I think that also tells you something.
And I'd like to add, obviously, to Senator Tuberville's point, I mean, Chad, under President Trump's leadership, we had the most secure border of all times. And we see what happened under this administration. Comes in first 100 days, and Biden does 94 executive orders. He says, we're going to stop all deportations. We're going to halt construction of the border wall. We're going to give amnesty to millions. This acts as a magnet. These policies act as a magnet for these people to come here. And we've even seen in discussions about potentially working to secure the border that President Biden is not willing to give up the very tools that he's using to abuse and create this crisis. And one would be if you look at the presidential parole authority. So President Trump paroled on average 5,600 people a year into the country, 5,600 people a year. At a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing, you saw Senator Graham expose that This president, President Biden, is actually paroling 1 million people a year into this country. And you look at that abuse of that parole authority, and to your point about the people who are coming here now, Chad, and also you look at Laken Riley's alleged murderer, and so many of these people are being paroled into this nation without proper vetting. And when you look at the numbers that were given from, the number of terrorists that are caught at the border, what is it, like 357 known terrorists that have been caught at the border? And that isn't even, in the previous administration, it was 11. And that's not even including the 1.8 million gotaways that we don't know who they are, where they're going, or what their intentions are. And then we leave those to our law enforcement officers in every community to deal with. So it's really, it is time for a change. We need to put policies back in place that actually work.
Absolutely. Just real quick on the asylum piece, because I think it's really important, Senator. I think what this administration is doing is, obviously, it's an unlawful use of the parole authority. I think once it gets fully litigated in court, that will be very evident. But what they're not telling the American people is that they are putting people in parole because they know they will never qualify for asylum. And so when you come in on parole, you come in for 2 years, you get work authorization immediately, unlike asylum proceedings. They know this, and so the Congress, the American people, and the country are going to have to face in 2 years, when all these individuals come up for parole renewal, what happens to them. And I think the administration is counting on either extending their parole for another 2 years, or you're going to have another class of undocumented individuals here in the country that we're going to be discussing what to do with.
I try to use this as an example of how radical this administration's policy is. At the end of President Trump's term, he instituted something called Operation Talon, which was an effort to deport previously convicted sex offenders. And Joe Biden got rid of it. There's a lot of things we disagree on in this country, but I would think we could come together, Republicans and Democrats, and agree that we should probably deport previously convicted sex offenders who are here illegally, but evidently that was a bridge too far for this administration.
Senator Brett, I was going to add something to what you were talking about. Well, last year in May, when we went to the border, you want to talk about something that breaks your heart? Wait till you see people that are getting caught coming across the border illegally, given a court date 5 years out, and then say, where do you want to go in the U.S.? We will fly you anywhere you want to go. It doesn't matter where you come from, your background, and that is how bad the Biden administration is failing. I mean, we are buying plane tickets to ship illegals anywhere they want to go and giving them a court date 5 years out.
What we used to say at the department, which I'm sure a number of law enforcement officers still do, is that the federal government's that last link in that human smuggling chain. Because once they make that very dangerous journey, they come across, they're trafficked across that border by the cartel members, they interact with DHS law enforcement, they're released, and then they are trafficked or they're sponsored to go to that last link in that human smuggling chain to a location, Atlanta, Cincinnati, wherever they may go. And oftentimes it's to work off their debt that they had to pay the cartels to get across that border.
Well, we're running out of time, and I want to thank everybody for being here, and I think it's it's a consensus that when you lose your streets and when you lose your borders, you don't have a country. And we're very close to that. There's no factor that blames anybody other than the Biden administration. Our law enforcement tries, they're being underfunded. Our border is wide open by design, and there's nobody trying to do anything about it. And people are dying every day, unfortunately. But that's the reason I'm a Trump fan, and he will close the border. Chad will tell you that. And, you can make this non-political or whatever, but facts are facts. And if we don't close it, we're going to lose our country as we know it. And it's not going to be the same that all of us had an opportunity to grow up in. So thanks for everybody being here, and hopefully people watching online had an opportunity to get something out of this. But this has been good, very informative from people from all areas, county, local, city, Border Patrol, attorney generals. Thank y'all for coming, and Pam, thank you for leading this conversation. Thank you and to all the senators for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you.